Welcome to my series on discernment. So, discernment, in what I'm talking about here, is discerning about the relationship that you're in and wondering whether it's something that is serving you, something that you're wanting, something that you can change, something that could make you happier, something that's worth saving. Um, all of that. And so a lot of the work that I do with couples is on deciding whether or not they're going to continue the relationship. But sometimes it's at a lower level and sometimes it's at a high level. Sometimes people have reoccurring fights and arguments, and it's the same thing over and over again. And I always call it like the trance fight. Like, I don't know what we're fighting about exactly, but it feels like it's always the same thing, right? We're always mad at each other about X, Y, and Z. There's the same old disconnection routine that we do. And my question to you, if that's going on in your relationship, or it has been for a long time, this chronic cycle of fighting, I really wonder sometimes out loud with people whether there's a way to clear the slate for real, not for real until the next fight and all that stuff is brought up again. And, things are never really forgiven. So, and sometimes I see another version of it in the discernment of whether people want to stay together is it doesn't feel like there's enough energy of connection. And so there's a real parallel living going on. And everyone kind of knows the dance moves, right? They know they can stay over here in this corner. They have to do such and such regular things together. But really, they're leaving each other alone, and they're not really connected as a couple. And some traits that are in there are loneliness, or their friends are more important, or there's a sense of obligation. So that's another version that I see. So I see extreme fighting, sort of extreme avoidance. And then I see sort of like people just sort of surrendering to whatever the circumstance is. And in this way, I sometimes think of this version, and I'm sort of giving very generalized versions, hoping that if you're listening to this, you're seeing some and you're relating to some of these patterns that I am describing. And the third pattern is just being resolute about the positioning in the relationship. And sometimes, we go into relationship, so one person's really good at that, the other person's really good at that. But it becomes like we get stuck in the things that we're good at, and the other person never tries to learn it or appreciate us for it. And so there's this really not seeing of the other person that goes on, and sort of this level of deep resentment. Um, and sometimes I think people come to the table with like the strengths, each person has a strength, but actually the relationship positioning almost seems like it's not like adult equal partnership. It's more like a very codependency caretaking relationship where after a while you don't really have a choice but to take care of that person that way. Like you are always like simple things like always a designated cook, always a designated planner, always a designated caretaker of the kids, always a designated moneymaker. Um, so those are some of the things that I feel like causes a lot of deflation in the relationship. People just don't have the energy for each other, and they're kind of just stuck in these patterns, and maybe they're not brave enough to look at them because they just don't feel very optimistic. So people come to me for this kind of discernment counseling or coaching. And basically, what I do is I just try to really help people look at the relationship as a whole. And I sort of diagnose the relationship and I see sort of patterns in the relationship and identify the patterns to the two players and see if there's any way that we can, use our best brain power to break out of these or to decide what to do all together. We all know that life is interesting and up and down, and there's good chapters and bad chapters of life and relationships. Um, and we have to tolerate things sometimes that we don't want to tolerate because there's life circumstances. So sometimes in a discernment model like this, because you should be able to have some conclusion or draw some conclusion about whether or not you want to stay in this relationship or not. And maybe outside external forces really doesn't give you that much of a choice. Like, you have to stay in this relationship for a little bit longer. It's not really time to leave it. It's not going to be healthy for anyone. Maybe it's not affordable. Maybe there's a crisis going on in the family, health crisis or money crisis or housing crisis. And so it's not the time to leave or to make a change. And maybe there's also a devotion, a huge level of devotion and loyalty, like a value system that says that we just have agreed to always be in this relationship, so we're not going to not be here. But the discernment can be helpful because it can talk about the limitations of the relationship, so you know you're not making it up. And there's also a sense of like you can figure out how to be healthier in it. Um, but one of the things that I want to bring about in this discernment part is the idea of like who you give your energy to. And do you need to have more energy or different energy or boundaries with your energy, so that you feel like you're not in this cycle, just like in your own madness, like not knowing that it's true what you're experiencing, and being able to change the cycle for yourself so that you're healthier yourself, which can adjust the cycle a bit in the discernment process, so that at least you feel like one of the things that you're working on, which is absolutely true, that you're responsible for your own happiness no matter what, even if you're unhappy in your relationship dynamic. You are ultimately happy, the person that's responsible for your own happiness. So in the discernment, I think it's a real important exercise to come to terms with the things and the relationships you're involved in and why you're involved with them and what your part of this cycle is about, because that is one thing that you can change as you're part of it and your attitude in it. And that's really, really key. So listen along with me for the next few um, sessions of this discernment protocol that I'm going to outline for you, and see what helps you, and see if there's things that you relate here that you can kind of start changing your mindset about this and have a different direction on how to be in this. The last part of it I want to say is that many people come here because they want to make their relationships better, and they want to see if their relationship has a chance. And I think that's a really valid, that if you've been in a stuckness, that you investigate whether it's possible to find that momentum again. And that's a really good question to ask yourself and to work with your partner on, um, especially if you have kids, because I think sometimes it's worth turning over every rock to see if there's something underneath that rock that could be lifted off the relationship, and that the connection could be found again. So that's the other aspect that I'm going to look at with you as well.